Good afternoon. Appreciate y'all coming out this afternoon, and we'll have a few more afternoon sessions, and I know it'll be handy for a few people that don't like to get out at night, or it might be icy, and some people just don't like to get out at night, and that's okay as well. We're on session number 4. Today we're going to talk about financial implications of the decision that we need to be making here shortly. Next week, I'll have a few comments, I'll take a few questions and answers. I have a questionnaire about some things that we need to think about individually and as a congregation, and in order to have a space where people can give some more feedback and can talk more. The more people in a room, the less each individual can talk, right? We'll break up into groups of 5, 6, 8 per thing, and we kind of have a guided discussion. And that I want everybody in every one of those groups to express your opinion and have an opportunity to say what you want to say and to let people know what you think, and we're kind of starting to get to the point where you can kind of start saying, well, I'm kind of leaning this way, or I'm leaning that way, and then kind of have it, be open, be polite, be honest, all of those things. So we'll do that next week. Today we're going to talk about some financial things, and I'll start with that. But John, you wanted to lead us off.
With something. Pray first.
And I will pray for you before you come up. So
I've got notes.
as we gather together, let's always open with a prayer. Gracious God, we pray as we seek your will for our church, and we look for that future that you lead us to. Lord, we pray that you would be with us in this meeting, that you would lead our discussion, that you would lead our decisions, that you would give us patience and grace and mercy with each other. Lord, make us wise. Let us be discerning, and let us be faithful above all. Lord, in your gracious name we pray. Amen. Amen. Come on up, Judge, and tell us what's on your mind.
And this may have something to do with next week. A couple of things that I wanted to make clear. We've talked about it.
Get on the camera, please.
Don't want to break you. We've talked about a trust clause, and I don't know if you all fully understood what that was. It's actually in our deeds, and I'm going to pass this around. This is just one. We have a number of deeds. There's some language in I think the book of discipline says that every deed shall include this language.
Paragraph 2501.
And so this is just to orient you. We've talked, and the pastor brought that up, but we've not physically looked at one of our deeds. So just you all look at that. That every deed that we own has that language in it. Basically, it says we have to obey the book of discipline. If you don't obey the book of discipline, they could actually bring a legal cause of action to basically seize the property. And we'll talk just a moment about that and the significance of that. The pastor, I think last week, talked about, and I think he gave us this copy, which is this termination of the trust clause, which is this equitable settlement. This is what I think will happen in April, May, or June, whenever the conference meets. This agreement, the church will basically agree that they will not enforce that clause in those deeds, basically. They're acknowledging that the trust clause is there in exchange for the money that you're giving us.
It's kind of like a quitclaim deed.
It is, and they will quitclaim, they will simply say, you own the property. Because if you go into a title opinion or a title search on our property, it shows that we own it. But then you see that clause, no one is going to buy this property because of that clause. So everyone understands that. So we've talked about a trust clause and what it was and how it applied. That in the deed that's what we're talking about. That's the significance of this whole discernment process. Now, and we've talked, and I'm not going to get quite into the homosexual issue yet, but I think that we all need to understand the rule. That the rule they've given us is limited in scope. And the preacher can talk more into detail about that today or maybe next week. Pastor, as far as our membership, are we up to date? If I was to go and get a...
Kathy keeps that in real time.
Okay. The churches in Campbell County have gone through this. The Methodist Church at Jacksboro has gone through this already. They've actually had a vote. And the DS showed, they have a different DS. And the DS shows up, and then they take a member of the church, and they act as supervisors of the election or the count or the vote. And so they will supervise. It's important that we get notice out, and I'll read, because the pastor went through the rule last week, and so they wanted, one of the concerns that the DS had in Jacksboro was that everybody got notice. They said when they meet the general conference, that's one of the concerns that they'll have. They'll want to make sure that every member of the church had notice and what the notice contained. The notice is very specific. And so the other thing, and we'll talk about this Thursday, I think, they wanted a title opinion done on all the property. They'll want that when they come together in April. Rob Asbury's church, who's an attorney in Campbell, he didn't want to do the title work because he was a member of the church. They had Jimmy Estep to do it, so they hired a local attorney. They did a title opinion of the property, basically show that we don't owe any money on our property. It's free and clear. The two things that they said they stressed was to make sure there was a complete audit of the membership and that the members all got notice of what was going on and given an opportunity to show up, and that they wanted to see that title opinion. Now, the vote. And the pastor's gone over, he's given us the rule, and I know when you look at it, because it's got all those legalese, and you have to have your reading glasses on to read it, and you read it and you think, oh, maybe I don't quite understand it. I think that the very first part of the rule talks about an audit of the membership. And again, this is coming from the rule, the special rule that they have passed for us. Special attention shall be made to give broad notice to the full professing membership of the local church regarding the time, place, and church conference call for this purpose. The purpose is human sexuality. And the reason why I wanted to take just a moment here, because sometimes I misspeak, and I misspoke at one. To me, when we talking about financial, this to me is a no-brainer issue when it comes to the property itself. But based on the limited rule, I can't vote to disaffiliate because I think it's a good financial decision.
Correct, that's correct.
Okay, I think it's important for all of us to understand. One, there's something that we do when we do a jury trial. It's something called polling of the jury. When the jury comes back and they reach a verdict, I'll ask the lawyers that they want me to poll the jury. There's 12 people in the jury box. And most of the time they'll say, yes, we want the jury polled. And I have to ask each individual person, is that your verdict? They have to tell me that's their verdict, not because they wanted to go to supper, not because they were tired and got aggravated because someone said, I just went along with the crowd. They have to specifically tell me individually that that's their verdict. If they can't do that, it's an invalid verdict. So, this human sexuality is the one reason they've given us to do this. And so I think that we need to all understand that. And let me just, next week, Sunday school, I teach Sunday school. Randall and I do. And so I go home after Sundays, I sort of look at next week's lesson. And this is the purpose statement for next week's lesson, of all things. To discern how to live faithfully in the world, without giving allegiance to the world. And I'll read this real quick. John 17, verses 16 and 7. This is Jesus speaking. They don't belong to this world, just as I don't belong to this world. Make them holy in the truth. Your word is the truth. Your word. Now, you go on the internet, of course, we all should take this serious, because we are not discriminating people. Nobody in this church is a discriminating person. I know that in my heart. I'm not. And we're forced, almost in a way, forced to make some kind of decision. And then some people will frown upon you when you make a decision to do this because of your own conscience. And so I read that little portion out of John. And so you go online, and the people who argue that this is okay and a pastor knows better at this than I, is that Jesus didn't specifically say anything about it. But we all know that Jesus came and said, I didn't come to set aside the law. I came to fulfill the law. And I read that part in John where it says, holy is the truth. Your word is the truth. And so I think Jesus made that clear. And we know, and the pastor gave us some links. Leviticus, and I think the Old Testament is pretty clear. Only Paul's pretty clear in his writings. And so when you read through that and you do that study, because that's what I think we're supposed to do, this discerning process that the pastor's talking about. And so, and this is the reason why I think we all need to understand when we vote, this is what we're voting for. And I'll say this, and I'll read this real quick, and I'll set down. Notice, and this is out of the rule, this is 2553:1. Notice must include, this is the notice to the members of the entire membership of the church. Because of the current deep conflict within the United Methodist Church, this is their word, this is the rule, around issues of homosexuality, and local churches shall have a limited right, limited, not because we think it's a good financial deal, not because of some other reasons. The church is allowing these churches to basically disaffiliate because of this particular issue. Under the provisions of this paragraph, to disaffiliate from the denominations for reasons of conscience, and that conscience is, when you look at the Bible as a whole, and you look at the Old Testament, you look at Paul's writings, you look at what Jesus says, for reasons of conscience regarding a change in the requirements and provisions of the Book of Discipline related to the practices of homosexuality or the ordination or marriage of self-avowed practicing homosexuals, as resolved and adopted by the 2019 General Conference. The reason why I say that is I think we all need to understand and be clear that if you vote to disaffiliate, you're disaffiliating because of that issue. And no other reasons. I don't see any other reasons here. And so I think it's important that we all understand and try to understand. It's impossible. The pastor has a doctorate degree in it, and I think he will tell you he doesn't know it all either. And it's a struggle, and it's something we do as we mature, as we become mature Christians. But that is it. That is the limited issue that we're voting on. And I just wanted to say that so that we're clear as we move forward. And the pastor's going to talk about the money issue. To me is a no-brainer. This is an easy thing. The hard part is when you're asked to do this. Is when if somebody pulled you after we vote and they pull you off to the side, and if a DS or somebody says, "Why did you vote that way?" If you vote to disaffiliate, you're voting to disaffiliate because of the policy, the change policies in homosexuality. If you have difficulty with that, then you need to figure out how to vote. So that's all I want to say, Pastor. And if I said something wrong, you straighten me out.
No, you are absolutely correct, and I'm glad that you have repeated that, because that is the core of the issue before us. But I'm going to read the second half of that sentence that you started. It's the provisions of the Book of Discipline as adopted by 2019, because that is our current Book of Discipline. So we are bound by our current Book of Disciplines. So it is related to the practice of homosexuality or the ordination or marriage of self-avowed practicing homosexuals, which this does not allow, or the actions or inactions of our annual conference related to these issues. So, does the Holston Annual Conference handle this issue in such a way that you think is contrary to what the Book of Discipline says? Almost all conferences have decided they're going to put a moratorium on charging people for any of these provisions. So if you preside over a homosexual wedding in your church, or if you come out as a practicing homosexual to your congregation and someone brings you up on charges because according to our polity, according to our Book of Discipline, you can't do that until they change that rule. Today, you can't do that. Well, they're just not going to follow up on it. They're just going to wait and see. And so, some people have a little bit of a crisis of conscience over that. This is our promise. This is our polity. This is our rule of how we're going to live together, work together, practice, or what we're going to do. And you've just decided part of it you don't like, so you're just going to throw it out. Well, what other part down the road are you going to get mad about and throw out? And I trust my spouse of 39 years with everything. I don't trust her with 87% of everything. I trust her with everything, right? And so I would prefer to be able to trust that we're going to follow these promises we've made to each other entirely. And if I've got a friend that I know that doesn't keep all their promises, it's kind of hard to keep them as a friend, right? So thank you for bringing that up. If you don't have a copy of this, the Holston Conference Disaffiliation Packet, I passed them out on a couple. If you need one of these, come see me. I've got some more copies in my office, and it's on the computer. We can print out as many as we need. It's also online at holston.org. The frequently asked questions thing gets updated. Hadn't been updated lately, but and I passed out the latest one I think last time. But that gets updated from time to time. It's online. If you want a hard copy, I've got some in my office. This is the rule. This is the playbook. This is the rule book. This is what we have to follow right now, is the disaffiliation packet. So if you want to know the exact rules, make sure that you're reading a copy of this. Let's talk about...
Can I say something?
Sure. Question?
No, more of a statement. Mike and Shelley and Michael and I went to the global church, the new church meeting yesterday over in Weber, Virginia? Weber City, Virginia. And I think it can be involved with the finances that you're talking about today, because that's some of what we learned about. But I think that there's a write-up that Mike Whiting wrote, a summary yesterday that he sent out to everybody. It's really, really helpful. But it was also really good because there were over 200 people, and they were from churches throughout Virginia and Tennessee. So we were getting feedback, input from different churches and what they had learned in the discernment process. Some had already left. In fact, the church we went to had already left, and the preacher has already left. But I think one of the most interesting things that affect us is one in dealing with the title, the clause, is that the rule right now is that they're talking about if you don't, they're doing a conferencing in May, possibly one in December. But if you don't do it by the end of this year, they're closing down the process in the United Methodist Church. They're closing the door, and they're going to make it much more difficult to leave if that's where you feel like you need to be. So I think that that's something to be considered, particularly when, even though it's not about assets, assets are obviously involved. The other thing that I thought was really kind of interesting, and we got it from several different people that we talked to, is that the feeling that's going on right now is that once the churches that are leaving have left, they intend to pursue a much more progressive agenda for the UMC. So this is just the beginning. It's what we, I told you in another meeting that I had been through this with the Presbyterian Church, and now my 88-year-old mother can't even go to her own church that she belonged to for almost 50 years because it's just so liberal. They're telling us that that's already in the plans for the UMC, so this is not this is just the beginning. So I think that that's very important. I mean, we talked about the financial end of it as well, but whatever decision the church makes and whichever group, if they choose to go, is whichever one they want to go to, we just need to really do our due diligence. They were very big on stressing that we needed our lawyers in place because there's so many things that we didn't think about, like tax ID numbers and employer ID numbers and things like that.
That's on my list.
I mean, it's just kind of overwhelming when you start looking
It's just,
at it
it's
all.
just like starting a business,
Right.
which I've done a bunch.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy, all the different aspects that we didn't really think about that me as a member had not realized had to be done. So I think Johnny really led us in the right direction with his advice, guidance, and what he wanted and suggested we do. But it was kind of an eye-opening experience to sit there and talk to these other folks from other Methodist churches and where they were in the discernment process, what they were up, what their feelings were, and what state they were in. And I think we really need to be aware of that, and you really need to get a chance to look at the information that Mike Whiting sent out, the summary, and the links, because I guess we're having a meeting with the Free Methodist Church, a Zoom one, plus what we did with the Global, plus they have some really, really good things on both of those websites to give you an idea of where they go. But it's a different process, it's a very different approach, but I think it's actually a much more kind approach than what we're looking at right now and where things are going to be.
Can I just add something? I think you're right about the end of the year kind of deal. And I think the preacher has been very, very good as far as the organization, organizing these. I mean, he's checking all the boxes as we go, because there's a flow in this process. He understands the tax issues and understand all that's underlined. If you go online and you start looking at attorneys, and I think we'll talk about this at the administrative council meeting on Thursday. There's some lawyers that will help you through the process. The hope is, now obviously we'll need a lawyer to do the title work. We have to have that checked. The hope is that we're maybe able to get through this process, and if the conference is okay, and we should be able to get, because Jacksboro has gone through this process without hiring a highfalutin lawyer. Now, they've done the title work, they got a local lawyer to do the title work of the bill. There are some conferences, I suspect, that are very difficult to deal with.
Yeah.
Those you need a lawyer. and I don't know, the pastor probably has a better lay of the land with our, I don't know about, I don't know. The hope is that we can dot all our i's, cross all our t's, run down there, they'll look at it, they'll say, look, all the members got notice, looks good to me, DS said she was at the voting looked to do well, you all paid your money, we promised you that we would do this, and we're gonna do this agreement, and you can have it. This is it, you have disaffiliated from the church. Hopefully that happens. Some conferences it's not that way. SMU in Texas got into I think maybe they appealed, but they somehow resolved their issue. What little I've read is the church simply wants to avoid litigation.
Right.
A lot of this gets settled because the trust clause that you see in that deed, if they want to enforce that, they got to take it to court. And that gets really, really messy, and they tend not to do that. So, but the pastor has a pretty good idea about the tax issues and those things. And it may be that we need a specific attorney we may or may not need. We definitely need someone to do the title work, and I'll bring that up Thursday to see if we can start that process and get a title opinion. But my hope is, and the pastor has better information than this. He has the scouting report as far as the conference is concerned. The hope is that if we do what they tell us to do, it should be painless. The hope is.
Well, I mean, they were very, very
Oh,
specific
they're
about having
I'm-
legal representation.
I'm gonna have trouble getting my information
Sorry.
in the time we have left, because I did have an hour's worth of information. We do need to have, it'd be good to have an attorney of record
I agree.
for us, so let's do that. Michael sent me a little link for a Fox News thing, and I invite you to take a look at that. I'm just going to read a little part of this because it's a couple of days ago. Lawyer representing Methodist churches trying to leave says contentious split is about power and money. Seems timely. Attorney Dan Dalton told Fox News Digital it's about money, it's about power. Y'all know the story. 2019, they opened up this little window that's going to last for a short period of time where people can leave for matters of conscience. There are some specific charges that you need to pay on your way out the door. I'm going to go over those in detail here in just a little bit. Some churches left a little bit early. Our neighbor, the North Georgia Conference, the largest church in their denomination, in their conference, decided they wanted to leave. The bishop appointed them a new pastor without consulting with them. Told the current pastor he now had a job in a little back office at the conference office doing something. They gave him like 10 days notice. Anyway, they didn't leave. It went to litigation. They finally settled. The church agreed to pay $13 million directly to the conference to give them permission to leave. It's starting to get a little bit ugly in certain spots. Very recently, the North Georgia Conference has announced that because of misinformation from various sources, I don't know what that means, but because of misinformation from various sources, it is temporarily halting any further disaffiliation efforts in the North Georgia Conference until the next general conference in April 2024, which is after the deadline of this window.
Right.
So essentially, if you're not out the door yet, they just lock the window.
That's kind of.
Did I mix a metaphor? They lock the door. They lock the window. They're not going to let you out. It's starting to get contentious. In Arkansas, there's a big downtown church in Jonesboro, Arkansas, the First Methodist United Church filed a lawsuit because they voted to disaffiliate. They went through this checklist. They went to their special called annual conference, and the annual conference rejected their deal, saying there were irregularities in the process. Their vote to disaffiliate was rejected. Their pastor was suspended by the conference. I don't know the details, but obviously it's getting a little bit chippy.
And that's the reason, that audit issue, if a conference, if they are getting picky, if you can't show that every member had notice and that every member understood what the vote was about. But no, the church, the indication is that the United Methodist Church is falling apart, and they're trying to stop it.
Well, and yeah, in meeting with the leadership of the church, I mean, we are constantly impressing on each other that we need to be very meticulous in our record keeping. We need to be very meticulous about this. This is their blueprint. This is their plan. Just need to very carefully follow it. And the documentation for this is probably going to end up being this thick, and that's okay. If anyone ever asks us, when did you do so-and-so, we'll just pull out the appropriate paperwork and say, this is when we did it. Here's our documentation on this. The attorney, they're quoting Dalton, the attorney. It all comes down to money. The conferences don't have any. The churches have it all. The conferences are seeing their churches that were providing the greatest amount of apportionments leaving. Churches that don't pay any apportionments or pay very little are staying because they can't afford to leave. So they're seeing that their ability to survive is declining. As the United Methodist Church hemorrhages churches, the denomination's general conference is slated to receive its lowest budget in nearly 40 years.
And one other thing to add, and as litigation gets cranked up, and I'm not going to get into the detail, that trust clause, that's questionable. It's very restrictive, and it's not favored in the law per se. Courts have been reluctant to get involved in church business. They've sort of let this go. But when you're talking about millions, because SMU got into this issue, and the court down there just simply struck the clause. And so...
Well, they've kind of opened the window by temporarily suspending the clause.
That's right. That's right. So, and I think the pastor makes a good point. We do need a lawyer of record. We'll talk about that Thursday. But the hope is that you know, as the conference, it's being liberal with the rule and say, just do these things. All of a sudden, we can't get the DS to come around anymore. And I can only imagine, now hopefully this doesn't take place, but as they run into April, and of course the pastor will be there, as they run into April, and then, you know, the bishop and everyone's sort of freaking out because all of, you know, they may get nitpicky over the whole thing. So we need to, but the pastor, I think we're doing the right thing.
And they're already closing it down by the end of this year. They said they're slamming the door at the end of this year.
Well, yeah, we've been saying that the whole time, because that's, read 2553, that's the rule. It ends at the end of this calendar year. Let's go from the general to the specific, all right? Because that's kind of the way that I always like to think about stuff. Let's talk about the big church, the general United Methodist Church. It's difficult to extract financial data from certain entities, you may have noticed. And I have to correct myself because I told you, well, off the top of my head, the general United Methodist Church, the big church, they spend about $100 million a year. I was incorrect because I finally tracked down some hard data from the general Council of Finance Administration. So these are hard numbers. From 2017 until 2020, the apportionments charged by the United Methodist Church to its churches, the big church, was $599 million. I told you it's about $100 million a year. That was off only by 50%. It's $149,750,000 a year. Okay? That's a lot. We support 11 general agencies. We support, I don't know, 20 or 25 other things that they ask for money. You know, every single Sunday in my United Methodist stuff that they send me all the time is a special asking Sunday for something. And you know, typically I just ignore about 95% of that stuff. But it's always special giving Sunday for something. And it's always directly to one of these various things. There have been thousands of churches have left already. Thousands of churches are currently in the process. The GCFA, the big finance people in Nashville, they're telling everybody, we want to be pretty conservative with you guys. We're telling you, you need to cut your budgets by 38%. So they're anticipating 40% of their money is walking out the door this year. And that's a lot. And there will probably be more churches to follow. We'll just see how it works. So they collected over this 4-year period, 2017 to 2020, they collected $599 million. Let's talk about business models for a second. The Fox News article says it's about money and it's about power. $599 million is almost a whole lot of money. Y'all are familiar with McDonald's, right? Have you ever carefully thought about what is the business model of McDonald's? McDonald's is a publicly traded company, their symbol is MCD. If you buy shares in McDonald's, how does McDonald's make their money? Well, if you ask 99 people on the street, they'll say, well, they sell hamburgers. Well, no, they don't. McDonald's is a real estate company because they're corporate. Because here is their business model. Every McDonald's in the world sits on a piece of land that is owned by McDonald's corporate. So they kind of have a trust clause. All right? If you want to buy a franchise, it's going to be $2 to $5 million if you buy one today. That means you lease that land from them. You agree to buy all their stuff, all their materials. You have to build a building, you have to hire the people, you have to do all the improvements, you have to keep it with a certain spec.